In the last video, we talked about quasi-experiments, and quasi-experiments are often the only thing we're able to do, but they are limited. While we may be able to draw a conclusion or to say that there's temporal precedence and covariance, it's harder to draw or to make the same kinds of conclusions about internal validity that we would like to make. And that's what we're going to talk about in this chapter. So just as a reminder, there are 4 different types of quasi-experiments: non-equivalent control groups, post-test only, non-equivalent control groups, pre-test, post-test, interrupted time series, where they're assessed before and after, and non-equivalent control groups, where we have at least 2 groups assessed before and after the intervention. What makes something a quasi-experiment? Relative to true experiments, quasi-experiments, or, not quite experiments, they lack random assignment. That's a big one, right? The control and treatment groups differ in terms of the treatment they receive, but also in terms of unknown and unknowable things. So we don't know how the organ donation group is different, or the opt-in group countries are different than the opt-out countries, except in terms of this policy. And so that's one of the things that needs to be addressed in such research. And we may not be able to exclude other explanations for the observed results. We may be able to control for them statistically, as we did with multiple regression, right? But it's a concern. So we've talked already about selection effects. Maybe the people in the opt-in countries are different than the opt-out countries in some systematic way. And without knowing that, we're going to have more difficulties making convincing conclusions about causality. There may be some sort of design confound. So for example, perhaps in addition to this different policy, perhaps there are differences in these countries in terms of how they talk about organ donation, in terms of public policy kinds of issues. So it may not only be the opt-in, opt-out difference. There may be some changes in maturation. Now, in this case, when we're looking at the cosmetic surgery study, because they had a comparison group, it makes it a little bit easier to draw conclusions, right? It looks like self-esteem is stable or may increase a little bit, and life satisfaction, same. But compare that to the other group where life satisfaction and self-esteem seem to drop over time. Now, one of the difficulties we often have is a history thread. We don't know what else is causing what we're seeing. And that is something that we need to be paying attention to here. There may be some regression to the mean, back to the cosmetic study or cosmetic surgery study. We don't seem to have extreme scores, and so it doesn't look like there's regression to the mean. And in fact, both the surgery and the comparison group looked the same initially on self-esteem. and probably not significantly different in terms of life satisfaction initially. So that rules out that explanation. Attrition threat, which participants are lost. Just as in an experiment, a true experiment, in a quasi-experiment, such as this one, we could go back in and figure out what's happening. Is there a systematic kind of loss? We can look at testing and instrumentation changes or threats. Because these were self-assessments, assuming they're the same form, that's probably not going to be a difference, or not going to be the explanation. If there are different forms of the self-esteem measure at both times, then that might be something we'd be concerned about. There may be some observer bias, except again, this is a self-report. On the other hand, there might be some demand characteristics and placebo. Being in a group and getting plastic surgery may mean that you approach things in a little bit different way. So when we're doing a quasi-experiment, we are balancing a number of different things. We have a real-world opportunity. Here is a big show, and it's an opportunity for us to look and see what the media's effect on suicidality is. Pretty high in external validity. This is not limited by some of the kinds of concerns that this is only something that happens in a lab. There are some concerns about ethics, particularly if we think one group is getting a more preferable treatment. Construct validity and statistical validity can be pretty good in quasi-experiments. They are similar to correlational studies in that they may both use independent groups designs, neither using random assignment, neither using manipulated variables. And they look like participant variables, except that participant variables examine similarities and differences that are associated with a social identity, where quasi-independent variables focus less on individual differences and more on things like laws, media exposure, and in the 13 Reasons Why, educational policies or educational programs. So, a number of things along that line. Now, there's a lot here. But as you're opening your newspaper or reading articles online, you're frequently going to see quasi-experiments. And stop and think about what you're seeing and what they mean. Take care and see you for the next video.